Imagine flying 7 miles above enemy territory. You are the apex predator of the skies. Nothing can touch you. Then, out of the sun, something appears. It has no propellers. It moves with an unholy speed, faster than anything you've ever seen. It doesn't just attack your bomber formation, it obliterates it. This wasn't science fiction. This was the reality facing Allied air crews in 1945. And as Germany crumbled, the race wasn't for land. It was for the very technology that powered this nightmare.
By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was all but over. The Third Reich was a corpse, twitching in its final death throes. But for Allied intelligence, a new frantic war was just beginning. They knew that behind the front lines, hidden in secret bunkers, forests and salt mines, lay a treasure trove of technology years ahead of its time. Jet engines, guided missiles, rocket planes, weapons that could define the next war. General Hap Arnold, the chief of the U.S. Army Air Forces, was obsessed with one thing: getting his hands on that hardware before anyone else, especially before the Soviets. He knew that the peace would be fragile, and the nation that controlled the skies of tomorrow would control the world. If you want to understand how deep this obsession ran, and how it sparked one of the greatest technology heists in history, stick around. You might want to subscribe, because this story gets wild.
The crown jewels of the Luftwaffe's arsenal were the Wunderwaffen, the wonder weapons. At the top of that list was the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was more than 100 miles per hour faster than the best Allied piston engine fighter, the P-51 Mustang. It climbed like a rocket and was armed with 4 30mm cannons that could tear a B-17 apart with a single burst. Then there was the Arado AR-234, the world's first jet bomber and reconnaissance plane. It was so fast, so high-flying, that for months it roamed freely over Britain and the Allied lines, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. These weren't just improvements on existing technology. They were a quantum leap, a leap the Allies desperately needed to understand and to steal.
To lead this technological treasure hunt, Hap Arnold needed a special kind of officer, not a staff room strategist, but a man of action, a man who understood aircraft inside and out. He found him in Colonel Harold E. Watson. Watson wasn't your typical colonel. He was a former test pilot, known for his sharp mind, his boundless energy, and his utter refusal to take no as an answer. He was given a seemingly impossible mission: go into the heart of a collapsing, chaotic Germany, find the enemy's most advanced aircraft, and somehow bring them home, intact. He was authorized to form a team of the best pilots and engineers he could find. They would soon earn a nickname that perfectly captured their mission's spirit: Watson's Whizzers.
Watson's team was a hand-picked group of specialists. There were combat-hardened pilots who could fly anything with wings. There were brilliant engineers who could look at a piece of alien technology and figure out how it worked. And crucially, there were German-speaking intelligence officers who could navigate the complex social landscape of a defeated nation. One key figure was Captain Robert C. Strobel, a naval aviator with a deep understanding of carrier operations, a skill that would prove unexpectedly vital. These men weren't on a combat mission. They were on an intelligence mission of the highest order. Their weapons were wrenches, slide rules, and the sheer audacity to believe they could pull it off.
The Whizzers weren't just grabbing whatever they could. They had a specific list, a collection of the Luftwaffe's most prized and revolutionary designs. Operation LUSTY, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology, was officially a go. Of course, the Meg 262 and R234 were at the top, but there were others. The Heinkel Hay 162, the so-called People's Fighter, a desperate last-ditch jet made of wood. The Horten HO-229, a futuristic flying wing that looked like a modern stealth bomber, and the Bochum BA-349 Natter, a vertical launch rocket interceptor, essentially a manned surface-to-air missile. This wasn't just a collection of airplanes, it was a glimpse into an alternate future of aviation, and Watson was determined to make that future America's.
As the final shots of the war were fired, Watson's teams plunged into the chaos. Germany was a shattered landscape. Infrastructure was gone. There was no law and order. It was a race against time. They had to get to the secret airfields and underground factories before the evidence was destroyed by retreating SS troops, looted by desperate civilians, or captured by rival Allied teams. The British were after the same technology, the French too, and the Soviets were sweeping in from the east, grabbing everything and everyone they could. The Whizzers moved fast, living off the land, often just a few hours behind the frontline combat troops. They were following a trail of rumors, captured documents, and interrogations, hunting for ghosts.
A serious, authoritative narrative voice. Tone should be like a high-quality historical documentary. Moderate pace with clear emphasis on names: Watson, Hap Arnold, locations: Lechfeld, Cherbourg, and technical terms: ME-262, UMO 004. Maintain a sense of tension and drama when describing the challenges and risks of the operation.
The Germans had been thorough in their retreat. Most of the jets were sabotaged. Engines were ruined. Landing gear was smashed. Control cables were cut. There were no spare parts, no technical manuals in English, and critically, no J2 jet fuel, the specific paraffin mixture the Junkers UMO 004 engines required. Furthermore, the local population was hostile, and former Luftwaffe ground crews had either fled or were now prisoners of war. It looked like the only way to move the planes was to dismantle them and truck them out, a process that could damage them beyond repair. Watson needed a better idea. He needed to fly them out, and to do that, he needed help from the last people on Earth you'd expect, the enemy.
A serious, authoritative narrative voice. Tone should be like a high-quality historical documentary. Moderate pace, with clear emphasis on names: Watson, Hath Arnold, Lechfeld, Cherbourg, and technical terms: MEM 262, JUMO 004. Maintain a sense of tension and drama when describing the challenges and risks of the operation. Watson made a controversial, brilliant decision. He sought out the very men who had designed and flown these jets. He found men like Karl Baur, Messerschmitt's chief test pilot. These weren't die-hard Nazis. They were professionals, pilots and engineers who saw their creations as works of art. Watson made them a deal: help us get these planes flight ready, and in return, you get food, safety for your families, and a chance to continue your life's work, albeit for your former enemy. It was a huge risk. These men could easily sabotage the planes during flight, but Watson was a good judge of character. He trusted them, and in a remarkable turn of events, the German pilots agreed. An uneasy alliance was formed between victor and vanquished, united by a shared love for aviation.
With the German experts on board, a frantic restoration project began. The airfield at Lechfeld became a massive outdoor workshop. Teams cannibalized parts from wrecked aircraft to make a few pristine examples airworthy. They called this process creating composites. They jury-rigged fuel systems, patched up hydraulic leaks, and deciphered complex electrical diagrams. The German pilots provided invaluable knowledge, pointing out critical design quirks and maintenance needs that the Americans never would have known. Slowly, painstakingly, out of the wreckage of dozens of sabotaged jets, a handful of flyable Me-262s and a single Arado AR-234 were brought back to life. The Frankenstein monsters were ready.
Watson's audacious plan was codenamed Operation Seahorse. The goal was to fly 10 Me-262s and 1 AR-234 from Lechfeld all the way to the French port of Cherbourg. There, they would rendezvous with an aircraft carrier for the trip to America. The carrier assigned to the mission was the British escort carrier HMS Reaper. It was a small jeep carrier, not designed for jets. Its flight deck was short, its crew unfamiliar with these new, powerful aircraft. Getting the planes to Cherbourg was only half the battle. Getting them safely aboard the Reaper would be a challenge of its own.
The moment of truth arrived. An American pilot, Lieutenant Robert Ansbach, was chosen for one of the first flights. The German pilot Karl Baur gave him a crash course. The instructions were terrifyingly simple. The Jumo engines were fragile. Throttle up too fast, they'd overheat and explode. Throttle back too fast, they'd flame out and you couldn't restart them. The landing gear was notoriously weak. The brakes were unreliable. Essentially, good luck. You can only imagine the tension as Ansbach powered down the runway, flying a machine built by his enemies, a machine known to be a death trap for inexperienced pilots. But the flight was a success. The Whizzers had proven it could be done.
The flight to Cherbourg was a nerve-wracking 500-mile journey over a continent still littered with pockets of resistance. The jets had no modern navigation aids. They had to be escorted by American fighters just to find their way. The German pilots flew some of the jets, a sight that must have confused the hell out of any Allied troops on the ground who saw swastikas and iron crosses flying alongside the American star. Mechanical problems plagued the flight. Engines flamed out, fuel gauges proved unreliable. One pilot was forced to make an emergency landing. But against all odds, the majority of the priceless aircraft made it to the coast. The fleet of Nazi superplanes had been successfully flown out of their homeland by their captors.
At Cherbourg, the final bizarre chapter of the European mission began. The jets couldn't take off or land from the Reaper's short deck. So one by one, they were hoisted aboard by massive dockside cranes. It was a delicate, surreal operation. These icons of German air power, these machines that had terrorized the skies, were now being carefully loaded like fragile cargo onto a British ship under American command. The deck was packed tight. The Whizzers had their prize.
They had managed to capture, repair, and transport an entire squadron's worth of enemy jets to the coast. Now, they just had to survive the Atlantic.
The journey home was anything but a pleasure cruise. The North Atlantic is unforgiving, and the escort carrier was tossed about by storms. The primary concern was protecting the aircraft. Salt water is incredibly corrosive, and the jets were exposed on the flight deck. The crews worked tirelessly, washing the planes with fresh water, checking the tie-downs, and ensuring their precious cargo wouldn't be damaged, or even worse, washed overboard. Colonel Watson, his mission nearly complete, could only watch and wait, hoping the ocean wouldn't succeed where the Luftwaffe and SS had failed.
In late July 1945, the HMS Reaper arrived in the United States. The sight of Me-262s and the sleek Arado 234 being unloaded onto American soil was a sensation. This was tangible proof of victory, not just in battle, but in the war for technological supremacy. The aircraft were quickly moved to Freeman Field in Indiana and later to Wright Field in Ohio, the centers for Air Force testing and evaluation. The heist was complete. Watson and his Whizzards had delivered the future of aviation to America's doorstep. But the story of the jets themselves was far from over.
The data gathered from these captured aircraft was priceless. American engineers tore them apart, studied their revolutionary Jumo engines, and analyzed their swept-wing designs. The lessons learned directly influenced the next generation of American aircraft. The F-86 Sabre, the American fighter that would dominate the skies over Korea, owed a significant debt to the German designs, particularly the Mech 2262's wing concept. Operation Lusty didn't just give America a few souvenir aircraft. It shaved years off American jet development programs and ensured its air superiority in the brewing Cold War. It was one of the most successful technology transfers in military history.
But what happened to the planes themselves? Tragically, once the engineers were done studying them, most of these historic aircraft were simply scrapped. In the post-war rush to downsize the military, budgets were slashed. It was deemed too expensive to maintain and preserve them. Of the 10 Me-262s Watson brought back, only a couple survived. The single, priceless Arado AR-234 was thankfully preserved and is now on display at the Smithsonian. The heroic efforts of the Whizzers saved the technology, but a shocking amount of the physical history was lost forever, cut apart and melted down.
Operation Lusty remains one of the most audacious and important special operations of World War II. It was a mission that required not just bravery, but ingenuity, diplomacy, and an incredible amount of sheer nerve. Colonel Watson and his team didn't just steal a few airplanes. They stole a technological leap, a head start in the arms race that would define the next half-century. It's a testament to a small group of individuals who, in the chaos of a collapsed empire, saw the future and risked everything to go out and grab it. What do you think is the most impressive part of this story? The technical challenge, or the fact that they got former enemies to help them? Let me know down in the comments.